He's defending 250 points there, and then he's also defending 250 points at the start of May from Lyon, and he's only holding 1,700 points. So if he doesn't defend those too well, all of a sudden Benoit Paire is going to be spat out of the top 50, you'd imagine, after being a seeded player in almost every tournament for the last 2 or 3 years. He's at the age of...
It's a miracle! Oh, yeah! Balotelli! Aguero!
Hello and welcome back to the On The Ball podcast. This is episode 109 of the show, and I am recording a tennis episode today. Recorded a rugby league episode earlier this morning that you would have seen by now if you follow us on social media. If you haven't, feel free to go check that out if you do happen to follow both sports. Otherwise, stick with me here, and we're going to be recapping the last 2 weeks of tennis tour action. The ATP and WTA tours have resumed as per usual after the Australian Open. Not really any changes, a few changes in terms of what tournaments are on and what weeks and what tournaments aren't on. The Rio Open hasn't been on, which is a 500 that's normally held in these weeks in Brazil, but that has been postponed. However, there has been South American clay court tournaments along with a few European tournaments, and then the women have been a bit of all over the joint with the Adelaide International and then Doha this week, and the men will follow that up next week. So we're going to go through the winners and the losers on both the men's and women's side. We're going to go through my votes for the week, as I do my votes every week for the tennis, and then we're going to look ahead at the next 2 weeks of action. I'm going to be looking to do a fortnightly tennis episode. It will depend on the schedule. Sometimes it might be 3 or 4 weeks in between episodes, but I felt this week we'll get one in, and then after the 500s in Dubai and Acapulco, we'll do a review, and then we'll be able to preview Miami the following week. So it's going to be interesting to see, especially this week, how Roger goes in Doha. But looking back, there's been a few big winners, and I'm going to start with Martin Fucsovics. He has been not a great player for a long time, but he's been a pretty consistent player. He's always had it in him to have an upset, especially on a hard court. And this week he made the final of Rotterdam, and that's a very impressive effort. It's a 500, and in the past he's really struggled for performances in tournaments like that. He's had good success in tournaments like the Oz Open. Me as an Australian and an avid supporter of the Australian Open, I know a lot about Fucsovics, but he's starting to take that into week by week action on the tour. He's up to rank 46 now. He is at the age of 29, so he doesn't have probably too much progression left in him, but I think he will be one to watch this year. He started the year off pretty well, and making the final as a qualifier in Rotterdam. He beat a Pelka in 3 sets, which is never an easy win on hard court. Then he dispatched of Alejandro Davidovic Fokina, who's been in incredible form. Then he beat Tommy Paul in straight sets. Then he dispatched of Borna Coric, who looked like an outside chance to win the tournament. And then he just couldn't get it done against Rublev, losing 6-7, 4-6. So overall, it was a pretty unbelievable week for Fucsovics. I can't remember how much the loser of a 500 picks up. It's something like 300 points or something like that. So a good week in terms of his rankings, a good week in terms of the money. And it's just going to be it's an exciting start to the year, really, for Fucsovics, hopefully setting up a lot more success this year. I think he's shown a lot of glimpses over the last few years. So I think it's about time that he puts in a real stint and bolts up those rankings. I think at one point he was pretty high, and then he started to slide a bit last year and the year before that. So it's good to see him back inside the top 50 and hopefully making a push for that top 30. My next winner is Andrey Rublev, the eventual winner of that Rotterdam tournament. He was the victor. He beat Fucsovics. He was really, apart from Tsitsipas, who did pretty well, Rublev beat him in the semis, so that was a pretty big win for Rublev, who often struggles against those big contenders. He was really one of the only big names who lived up to the billing, really. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but Medvedev and Zverev both lost in the first round. Bautista Agut lost in the first round, Goffin second round, Felix and Stan first round. So a lot of the big names in Rotterdam were disappointing. However, Rublev definitely stood out, as he so often does at these tournaments. He loves the 250, he loves the 500, he just needs to start pulling it out in Masters and Grand Slams. He beat Giron in straight sets, then he dispatched Andy Murray in a return tournament. He beat Robin Haas, Andy Murray, so I guess that's a positive for him at the end of the week. He then went on to beat Jeremy Chardy in close fashion in 3 sets, but then to beat Tsitsipas in straight sets and Fucsovics in straight sets. That overall capped off a pretty big week for Andrey Rublev, who I wouldn't say his Australian Open was disappointing, but just the fact that he got dispatched by Medvedev so comfortably after people like myself thought he was an outside chance to go all the way to the final. So it's good to see that he's starting to take those steps into becoming a really top player that he has shown in the last few years, especially at the small tournaments. But it's good now that he can start to challenge the likes of Tsitsipas, and that takes his overall record against Tsitsipas to 3-3. So Tsitsipas seems to be someone that he can beat. Now he just needs to take that step and start challenging Medvedev, team, and the big three. So really happy for Andrey Rublev. I'm a big fan of his work, so it's good to see him getting big wins like that. Next up, we've got Alexei Popyrin, who won the Singapore Open. It was in the first week, and it was a 250, and he won pretty comfortably in the end. He had a good tournament. He beat the likes of Cilic in 2 tiebreakers, which I thought was a very impressive win. Cilic was my pick to win the tournament, as I mentioned on this podcast 2 weeks ago. He then beat Bublik in 3 sets, which is always a good win. Bublik's a very tough opponent. He beat Matty Ebden in straight sets in the quarterfinals, and then in the earlier rounds, he disposed of 2 opponents that he should have disposed of, but you never know with someone ranked around 100. They can often be quite inconsistent. So Popyrin looking forward, I don't think he's got the ability to become like a top 30 player. However, I do think he has the potential to become the level of someone like a Jordan Thompson, just be in and around 40s, 50s, 60s, be able to consistently get to second, third rounds of slams and masters, and be able to contend for the odd 250 here or there. So I think Popyrin can definitely reach that stage, and he started this year showing that he could be capable of that. He had a pretty impressive Australian Open, sadly crashed out to Lloyd Harris, but that was probably more to fatigue. So for him to back it up in Singapore and then go ahead and win, I thought he did well enough just to get to the semis, but then to beat Cilic and Bublik, that was very impressive. So ultimately, it was a pretty good 2 weeks for Alexei Popyrin, and he now finds himself up to 82 in the rankings. And at the age of 21, he sets himself up for a pretty big year in terms of rankings. He's not defending too many points anywhere, so we could definitely see him end the year in the top 50, which would be pretty exciting for Australian tennis, with the likes of Jordan Thompson, Kyrgios, Millman, De Minaur already in and thereabouts in the top 50. So it'd be pretty cool if they could get a 5th guy into that top 50. My final winners on the men's side is the Serendolo brothers. The 2 Argentinian brothers had an absolute blinding 2 weeks on the clay courts of South America. In the first week in Cordoba, Juan Manuel Serendolo, young 19-year-old, came from absolutely nowhere to win the tournament. I have to say, I've ridiculed the Sunshine Swing. Wait, they don't call it the Sunshine Swing. I can't... it has a name. I've forgotten the name of it. But the South American swing, it's never really the greatest standard. It's often the clay court specialists ranked around 50 to 120 who go out there and try and get points. We often see guys like Christian Garin or Juan Ignacio Londero who get points that maybe they don't necessarily deserve relative to the difficulty of getting points elsewhere. But Juan Manuel Serendolo came through qualifying. He had to beat Juan Pablo Varillas in qualifying, who was the number 4 seed. He then, in the main draw, went on to beat Thiago Seyboth-Wild, who showed himself last year on this swing that he was a pretty exciting prospect. He then dispatched of the 3rd seed Kekmanovic in 3 sets, which was a great win. He then did the exact same thing to Thiago Monteiro, the 7th seed. He was just grinding all week. He beat Federico Coria in 3 sets, and then he got into the final against Albert Ramos Vinolas, and he won in 3. Incredible victory. I think he was, at the time of the tournament, I think he was ranked outside the top 200. He's now ranked 182 at 19 years old. Looks like he's going to be a talented clay player. It'll be interesting to see if he comes to the European clay season and see how he goes there against the big boys, but definitely an impressive 2 weeks for him. He didn't necessarily have the same success in the Argentinian Open where he got special exempt, but he lost to Federico Del Bonis in straight sets, but that's probably to be expected after a week of grueling 3-setters on clay. But yeah, incredible week for the 19-year-old. And then the following week, his brother backed it up. Federico Serendolo. He is the better of the two. He is ranked 120 Francisco Serendolo, sorry. Before the tournament, he was ranked around 150. He made the second round of Cordoba, but then in Buenos Aires, he really came into his own, making the final of the tournament. He eventually went down to the winner, Diego Schwartzman, as you would expect, but he beat Federico Coria, Benoit Paire, Pablo Andujar, and Albert Ramos Vinolas, who must have been sick of the Serendolo brothers at this point. And he's also at 21 years old. He's now knocking on the verge of that top 100, which would see him get entrance into pretty much most tournaments on the calendar, which would be pretty exciting for him. So once again, these two are names to look out for in the European clay court season, and it'll be interesting to track their progress throughout the rest of the year. Now, moving on to my men's losers, I'll be looking at Benoit Paire. He had an absolute stinker of a 2-week period on the tour. He was on the South American swing in Cordoba. He got matched up against Nicolas Jarry as the second seed. He beat him in straight sets, but then went on to lose to Federico Coria in straight sets 6-3, 6-2, which was pretty disappointing for the number 2 seed. And then he went on to Buenos Aires and he got dispatched. In that tournament, he was placed up against the guy who I spoke about earlier, Francisco Serendolo, and lost in 3 sets there. So very disappointing 2 weeks for him. He will now come back to Europe or Doha or wherever he's going. And it's just going to be a really big couple of months for him. He's had a shocking start to the season. If we look at his results earlier, in Astana, which was his last tournament last year, he lost to Mikhail Kushkin despite being the number 1 seed going into the tournament. Then in the ATP Cup, he got dispatched by Dominic Thiem and Fabio Fognini. Then in the Oz Open, he lost to Gerasimov in 4. And then he's had this 2-week run. And this week, he is not playing singles in the Chile Open, but he's playing doubles. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Not really sure why he's there, but that's a strange turn of events. But he's defending points at Marrakesh in April. Obviously, it's a bit different this year with the tournament schedule, so I'm not sure if that tournament's actually happening then, but he's still got to defend those points in that week. He's defending 250 points there, and then he's also defending 250 points at the start of May from Lyon. And he's only holding 1,700 points. So if he doesn't defend those too well, all of a sudden Benoit Paire is going to be spat out of the top 50, you'd imagine, after being a seeded player in almost every tournament for the last 2 or 3 years. He's at the age of 31 now, so he's getting to the end of his career, and if he doesn't turn this form around, he's going to find himself slipping down the rankings pretty quickly as these COVID rankings start to unfold. And I think they're disguising a lot of players' actual level right now with the way they've been able to defend points for 2 years, but I think he's going to start to get exposed. And another man who will be joining him in that expose is John Millman. He similarly had a shocking start to the year. He got dispatched by Carreno Busta in the ATP Cup. Then in the Oz Open, he lost it in disappointing fashion to Corentin Moutet. In Singapore, he got dispatched by countryman Matthew Ebden, who beat him 6-4, 6-1, which was pretty disappointing. And then he lost what you'd expect him to lose, but to lose to Dimonor 6-1, 6-4. You don't really associate those kind of losses with John Millman. He's shows a lot of grit on court. He's a resilient character. You would expect him to put up more of a fight than a 6-1, 6-4 against someone as young and inexperienced as Dimonor. So Millman will be kicking himself right now. He has Basilash V in the Doha Open this week, so that's going to be an interesting one because obviously Basilash V is a higher ranked player than Millman, but definitely someone Millman who would fancy himself against, and Basilash V is also in shocking form and has been for about 12 months, so it's going to be a big match there for both of them. In terms of Millman's rankings, he's defending most of his points at Tokyo, which is later on in the year in October. He's defending 320 points there. He's also defending 250 points at the back end of the year from Nur Sultan. So he's got time to get his form together because he doesn't have too many points to defend between now and then, but he's really got to pull his finger out. Otherwise, similarly to Benoit Paire, he's going to start to slip. And at his age, it's going to be hard to see him, really hit the heights that he was once reaching with the likes of his almost upset victories over Roger Federer and stuff like that. So at the age of 31, he really needs to pull his finger out at the ranking of 41 as well. Otherwise, he's going to find himself down at 70 and 80 pretty quick, and he won't be able to enter all the tournaments that he wants to. Next up, we've got the winners on the women's side of the tour. They've had Adelaide, Doha, and Lyon in the past 2 weeks. For me, the first winner is Clara Thompson, who really announced herself onto the tour this year. Clara Thompson has been a young prospect for a few years now. She was the number 1 ranked junior player at one point, and she's won a few junior Grand Slams. And at the age of 18 now, she's really starting to mix it with the big guns on tour. This was one of her first entrances into a tour tournament. I don't know if she's played too many other tournaments. She obviously played the French Open last year and upset Jennifer Brady in the first round, 9-7 in the third, and that pretty memorable encounter. But at Lyon, she went the whole way, which is pretty incredible for an 18-year-old who had to qualify for the tournament. She cruised through qualification pretty comfortably, got matched up against the number 1 seed, which is pretty much everyone's nightmare as an unseeded player, and she dispatched of her 6-3, 6-4 on the first day of the competition, which got everyone in the tennis world's ears perked and really following her progress for the rest of that tournament. She then went on to beat Timea Babos, Camilla Giorgi, Paula Badosa, and Victoria Golubic on her way to her first tour title as a professional tennis player at the age of 18. That's pretty incredible, and I think we're going to have a serious talent on our hands in the WTA for many years to come. And it's going to be exciting to see how she goes this year. She's probably going to receive wild cards into a lot of tournaments, and she's going to be, she might have to qualify for a lot of tournaments as well, but she's going to be a dangerous player now ranked inside the top 100, which will see her have entrance into the likes of Grand Slam. So she's going to be one to watch out, especially throughout the European season on her home turf. And yeah, just really excited to see how Clara Thompson goes for the rest of the year. Another person who's had a great few weeks, she's had a great start to the season really, is Jessica Pegula. She's had an incredible start to the year. She made the semi-final of the Doha Open this week, following her impressive performance at the Oz Open. This week, she beat Qiang Wang in the first round, then dispatched of Ostapenko in the second, and then she upset Karolina Pliskova in straight sets 6-3, 6-1, which was very impressive. She lost to the eventual champion Petra Kvitova, but that's something you probably wouldn't expect her to do. And as I'm filming right now, she's actually playing Yaroslava Shvedova in Dubai, and she is up a break and a set already. So she is in insane form after making the quarterfinals in the Oz Open and losing in 3 sets to Jennifer Brady. But she's definitely one to watch for the rest of the year. She's come out of the gates absolutely flying. She's now up to rank 36, and in no time will be in the top 30 and will be seeded at pretty much every tournament she enters. So Jessica Pegula is arguably been the player of the year so far, and looks like she's going to keep it going in Dubai. My final winner on the women's side is Iga Swiatek, the young 19-year-old. She's still 19. Her birthday's in May. After obviously winning the French Open last year, people have been wondering if it's just the fluke. She hasn't played too much tennis since then, but she's come out this year and she's basically just shown how good she is once again. She went out in the 4th round of the Oz Open, which she might be disappointed with, but she pushed Halep to 3 sets, which I think was pretty impressive. But then she came out in the following week and cruised to an Adelaide International victory. No one got within arm's reach of her. She dispatched of Madison Brengle, Madison Inglis, Danielle Collins, Jill Teichmann, and impressively in the final, she beat Belinda Bencic 6-2, 6-2, who was in pretty good form herself. She's now up to 15th in the rankings at the age of 19. That's very exciting. Likely going to end the year in the top 10 as she won't have to defend her French Open points. Actually, that could be false because that is after the date where it changes from 21 to 2021. Yeah, anyway, you know what I mean. So she might have to defend that. So she might fall down the rankings following that. But before then, she might already crack to the top 10. She's playing Dubai this week, and she has a bye into the second round, so it'll be interesting to see how she goes there. But yeah, really impressive from Iga Swiatek, who's had a great start to the year. On the flip side of that coin are the people who haven't had such hot starts. Ash Barty has had a pretty disappointing start to the year. She obviously has a lot of pressure on her in the Australian Open summer, but she came out and won her first tournament in the warm-up, but then got knocked out in the quarterfinals to Karolina Muchova, which was disappointing for the number one seed, as a lot of the seeds crashed out in her side of the draw, and it looked like Barty was going to cruise to the final and have a tough test in that final, but it was disappointing that she didn't get there in the first place. And then at the Adelaide International, where people like myself thought she was going to bounce back and show us why she's the number one player in the world, she proceeded to lose in the first round, her first match, to Danielle Collins 6-3, 6-4. So that was pretty disappointing from Ash Barty, who's not had an ideal start to the year, and she is not playing this week in Dubai, so she's not going to be able to prove her doubters wrong just yet. She might be waiting till Miami to do so. But yeah, Ash Barty's got to start putting together some performances. Otherwise, she, after her French Open points have to be defended this year, she might all of a sudden spit out that top 5 and really struggle in those rankings for the rest of the year. Another person who's had a pretty disappointing start to the year is Petra Martic. I'll be honest, I don't really know how she's still ranked so high, but in Adelaide, she was the 6th seed. She beat Samsonova in 3 sets, but then proceeded to lose to the youngster Corey Goff. And I just don't think Petra Martic will be ranked as high as she is for very long. In the Oz Open, she lost in the first round to Olga Danilovic, which was very disappointing. She was the ranked number 16. And someone who you would back on hard courts. She had a disappointing start to the season as well in the warm-up tournaments, and in the Phillip Island Trophy, she only won a couple matches there and then got absolutely killed by Daria Kasatkina. So that's been a very disappointing start to her season, and she's now down to rank 21 already, and at the age of 30, it's looking like that trend might continue unless something drastically changes. She's playing in Dubai this week, so that'll be interesting to see how she goes there. And yet, Petra Martic is probably one to look at this year because she could be on the end of a lot of upsets if she keeps this form up. Now, quickly looking at my votes for the tours, starting on the women's side. In Adelaide, obviously Iga Swiatek picked up the most votes. Jill Teichmann, Storm Sanders and Shelby Rogers also picked up votes there. At Lyon, Clara Thompson picked up the most votes. And in Doha, Jessica Pegula did, and that takes us to the overall leaderboard, where Jessica Pegula actually leads it after her impressive performance. In Australia, she leads Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams, who are the only 3 people above 100 votes, so that's one to look out for. And then on the men's side, the Serendolo brothers obviously dominated this last fortnight. They both picked up 12 votes for their respective breakout performances. Popperin picked up 12 votes for his Singapore Open. Goffin didn't quite get the full votes for his win at Montpellier. Peter Gojewicz stole those away from him, but he got 9 there. And then at Rotterdam, Martin Fucsovics stole the most votes, and Rublev had to settle for seconds there. So looking at the overall leaderboard, Karatsev is still on top after his Australian Open breakout. He leads Medvedev, Djokovic, and Mackenzie McDonald as well, who won the Nur-Sultan Challenger 2 weeks ago. So he's had a good start to the season, Mackenzie McDonald. Another one who's had a good start to the season on the Challenger Tour is Thomas Matchak, who won a Challenger in Nur-Sultan last week after an impressive performance the week before as well. And that takes us to this week's action, where we will have the Abierto Zapopan. I don't know why it's called that this year, but it's the Guadalajara Open. Look, it's not the greatest tournament, if I'm going to be honest. The seeds are basically the only players in the top 100, so I'm not sure. I'm probably not going to make a prediction there, but we'll follow that one closely. However, in Dubai, we are absolutely loaded with talent. We have the likes of Svitolina, Pliskova, Sabalenka, Kvitova, basically all the players from the Doha tournament, so that's exciting. Swiatek's also made it over there, so we'll see how she goes this week. The matchups to look out for, we've already had some people make it through to the second round. Madison Keys is already through, Kuznetsova's through, Kurtmatova's through, Corey Goff has beaten Katerina Alexandra. Corey Goff made it through as a wild card, so that's exciting. And there's just going to be a lot of good matches, really, with the amount of talent at this tournament. If I had to make a pick, or it's tough to make a pick, I'm going to say Sabalenka had a disappointing performance last week, so I'm actually going to say she bounces back this week and wins this tournament. Honestly, I have no clue, though. She is up against Cornet and then probably Kontaveit and then Swiatek, so she definitely doesn't have an easy run. Even Kvitova, off the back of her win in Doha, could back it up in Dubai, so that's going to be one to watch. But obviously the big story this week in tennis is the return of Roger Federer. He's playing his first tournament in around 10 months, I think. So actually it might be since last year's Australian Open. Actually, I don't know when his last tournament was, but it's going to be incredible to see how he goes. Everyone's basically just intrigued whether he's going to be the Roger Federer that we all know, or if he's going to be a more subdued, just lesser ability kind of player now. I just don't see a world where he is. I think he's just going to come back and be Roger Federer. Obviously, I think he's past his prime, as most athletes are at his age, but yes, it is his first tournament since the 2020 Australian Open. So it's going to be exciting to see how he goes in Doha. Looking at his draw, he's going to play Jeremy Chardy or Dan Evans in the second round. So as he's got to buy it through the first. So that's going to be an exciting thing to look out for. He's got Shapovalov in his half of the draw along with David Goffin. So he'd probably fancy himself there. Dominic Thiem and Rublev are also in this tournament. So a lot of good players, a lot of informed players. Karatsev is also making his return to action. He's up against a Qatar wildcard who you'd think he would dispatch of, and then he's got a match up against Dominic Thiem, which we probably won't expect him to win, but it'll be a good test to see if that was just a fluke performance or if he's really going to be at this level for the rest of the year, which you probably wouldn't expect, but you never know with Karatsev. Then in Marseille, we've got Medvedev, we've got Kachanov, we've got Tsitsipas, we've got Sinner, we've got Nishikori, so that's also a pretty good tournament. That's going to be one to look out for. And then in Santiago, Benoit Paire is playing singles. I'm not sure why I didn't say it on Google. We've got the Serendolo brothers back in action, so that's going to be one to look out for. And you've got all the clay quarters like Marco Cecchinato, Daniel Galan, Pedro Sousa, a lot of other good players, Jean Menard. So that's going to be an interesting one to follow. Christian Garin is there. Can he make up for last week? And, well, can he just prove that he belongs in the top 30, as I don't believe he does. But him and Benoit Paire have a lot to prove. So that's going to be an interesting one to follow as well. And then in the following week, we have Dubai and Acapulco. So a lot of good tennis to come. And then Miami the following week, but we will have an episode before then. So thanks for tuning in. Obviously, not the most structured episode before today. I'm going to try and come up with a bit of a structure for these tennis episodes, so I'm not just rambling like I was today. But thanks for joining me. Feel free to get around the video and podcast and all of our platforms on social media. And yeah, tune in next time. Cheers.